The female figure on the auction platform was about to be sold to pay off the debts her deceased husband had left behind. Under the blazing Arizona sun, Meridian Cross positioned himself at the rear of the crowd, his ebony complexion glistening with moisture. A ragged mark on his jaw that ran from his left ear spoke of experiences that most people preferred not to talk about. He had arrived in town that morning with enough gold coins in his leather pouches to purchase a significant portion of the region. However, land acquisition was not his goal. Rather, his mission was focused on her. As he made the announcement that Evangeline Hartwell would be put into bonded labor, 7 years of work to fulfill her husband's gaming obligations, his voice reverberated throughout the town square. The assembled audience displayed both intrigue and repugnance as they whispered among themselves. Such sales had regrettably become commonplace in the chaos of the war. However, the public remained unaware of Evangeline Hartwell's alternate identity, which haunted Meridian's dreams at night and drove him every mile to this location. Despite her shaking hands, she maintained her elevated position on the surface with her head held high and her emerald eyes burning with resistance. She wore her elegant gown as if it were protective armor, despite the fact that it now looked worn and patched. The woman who had possessed him as property was the same one who had once spit saliva at his face and addressed him with words no one should endure. Her command to have the mark burned into his skin when he was just 16 years old had caused Meridian's hand to automatically move toward the mark that was hidden beneath his clothing. The mental wound lasted a lifetime, while the physical pain lasted for weeks. Now, things had turned around in the most bizarre way possible. The price of the competitive offer was $50. A bar owner and a nearby cattle rancher each extended their hands. 75, 100, and 125 were the progressively increasing amounts. Evangeline's gaze traveled throughout the group, settling on each potential customer with a mix of anticipation and dread. Then Meridian came into her vision. She felt the impact of recognition like a physical one. Her face became as pale as desert bones, and she opened her mouth in surprise without saying a word. They had both changed over the course of 2 decades, but some faces remain so deeply ingrained in one's spirit that they cannot be erased by time. He was precisely who he was and had come precisely for a reason, she knew. As the audience grew impatient, the auctioneer asked for higher bids. Meridian moved forward, his steps echoing off the wooden boards as he got closer to the platform. Evangeline was unaware that Meridian Cross had not gone to Copper Ridge to exact revenge. He had come for something much more dangerous, something that would shake this community to its core and force everyone present to re-evaluate their beliefs regarding fairness, compassion, and the price of salvation. She remained unsure whether she would survive learning the truth about the reason why the man she had once raped had traveled hundreds of miles to buy her freedom. Meridian raised his hand with the calm precision of a man who had never misplaced anything he truly desired. $31. The number of stunned murmurs from the crowd was greater than what most Copper Ridge residents had heard in 2 years. Since no one could match such wealth, the remaining bidders immediately withdrew. Everyone was really focused on Evangeline's response. Her expressions were one of absolute terror, rather than one of relief. She started wildly shaking her head, and her eyes got wide with fear. She murmured, "No," followed by a more insistent, "No, anyone except for him." Her emotional outburst perplexed the auctioneer, who struck his gavel. "Madam, this gentleman has made a generous offer that will completely satisfy your obligations," he said. Evangeline's desperate voice cracked. "You do not understand. That man is, the auctioneer continued, disregarding her objections, "going once." Meridian's stone-carved expression remained unreadable as his dark eyes remained fixed on hers. He experienced a flood of internal memories. The plantation house where he had been given bondage, the cotton fields where he had to work from dawn to dusk, and the day she chose him to be punished when a tool disappeared, not because he had stolen it, but because she wanted someone to blame. "Perhaps this will instruct you regarding your position, boy," she said, her voice as cold as a winter wind, the iron brand heating in the flames. "Twice going." A man in the crowd abruptly rose to the occasion. "Just a moment," she said. Sheriff Nathaniel Cole was wearing a badge that caught the afternoon light. "I'm familiar with that face. They refer to you as the bonus hunter, or Ghost Rider." Meridian gave a slow nod. He had not progressed as quickly as his reputation had. He had nabbed more than 40 wanted criminals, both dead and alive, within 3 years. Some said he was the best tracker west of the Mississippi. Others said he had supernatural abilities and could find anyone, no matter how well they tried to hide, anywhere. The sheriff added, "Well, I'll be damned. What draws a well-known bounty hunter to our small auction?" With a low, steady voice, Meridian responded, "Personal business." However, Evangeline was aware of precisely what kind of personal business. 20 years ago, shortly after she had imposed his punishment, she had seen the same icy resolve in his eyes. He had looked at her with a threat of retribution even when he was a slave who was 16 years old. She had sold him the following week, in part to get rid of evidence of her cruelty, but mostly because those eyes had kept her awake at night. Sold. The gavel fell with a vengeance. Meridian did not move as the crowd began to disperse. The woman who had previously owned him was now legally obligated to serve him for 7 years as he stood there staring up at her. He was approached by Sheriff Cole. "Listen, Ghost Rider. This is a legal transaction. I don't know what history you two have. Whatever you have in mind," Meridian said quietly, "I plan to follow the law. Contracted service for 7 years. However, the manner in which he spoke, it chilled Evangeline to the bone. 7 months. 7 years under the control of a man she had tortured, labeled, and treated as if he were nothing more than a human being. Meridian finally addressed her directly as the sheriff left. "Come down." She had repeatedly commanded him with those 2 words, which carried the weight of decades. They both felt the terrible symmetry of the roles being reversed now. Evangeline stumbled as she descended from the platform. She was no longer the powerful plantation steward, but a woman who had lost everything as she stood before him. "What are your goals?" She spoke softly. After spending some time observing her, Meridian did something that astonished both of them. He smiled. But it wasn't just a smile from a vengeful man. It was something much more nuanced, indicating that the next 7 years would not be what either of them had anticipated. "We're going to have a conversation about your son first," he stated. Evangeline's knees almost gave way. When her world fell apart, she gave up her son for adoption, Thomas, and no one in Copper Ridge knew he was there. How on earth could he be aware of Thomas? Meridian thought Evangeline might faint right there in the dusty street as the color completely disappeared from her face. "My son," she stutters. "I don't understand what you're saying." Thomas Hartwell, who was born on March 15, 1849, when he was 3 months old, he was taken to the Santa Fe Sisters of Mercy Orphanage. Meridian spoke with the accuracy of a man who had done his homework. "Green eyes and blonde hair similar to yours. Has a birthmark on his left shoulder that looks like a crescent moon." Evangeline thrust her hand into her mouth. Only a person who had actually seen her child could know the birthmark information. Before poverty forced her to give him up, she had kissed that little mark every night for those precious 3 months. "How are you?" She spoke softly. Because I discovered him, she was struck hard by the words. Because her legs were suddenly unable to support her weight, she stumbled backward. The same soft touch Meridian had used to comfort other slaves when she wasn't looking steadied her. "Where is he?" She spoke with a primal, raw sense of despair in her voice. She suddenly felt every maternal instinct she had suppressed for 17 years. "That is entirely up to you." Meridian pointed her in the direction of his magnificent black stallion, which resembled its quiet intensity. He gave her a small daguerreotype photo he had taken from his saddlebag. Evangeline's throat held her breath. The young man in the picture was clearly her son, now 17 years old, tall and powerful with her eyes and his father's obstinate jaw. The fact that Thomas was clad in a military uniform, however, caused her heart to stop. Meridian explained, "He enlisted with the 9th Cavalry Regiment 6 months ago. Buffalo Soldiers, as they are known. One of the first Army regiments with only black members." Evangeline began, then stopped, but he's not. Although her son was not black, he had been raised alongside children of all races in an orphanage. Those soldiers had become his brothers in his mind. Meridian went on to say, he doesn't know who his real mother is. Thinks his parents were killed by a cholera epidemic. However, he is scheduled to ship out in 2 weeks to fight Apaches. Threatening territory. Men do not always return. The threat was clear despite being veiled. The only person who could help her get to her son in time was Meridian, whose son was in imminent danger. "What do you require of me?" Even though she was already aware that the response would be more complicated than simple retaliation, she still asked. Meridian said quietly, "I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything you love. But not the way you think." He mounted his horse and extended his hand down to her. "I'm going to Santa Fe with you. Together, we're going to locate your son." Evangeline stared at his outstretched hand, which was the same hand that she had previously witnessed branded and scarred by her orders. It was now offering her the sole opportunity to save her child. "Why would you assist me in finding him?" Meridian's expression became more distant and eerie. "Because, Evangeline, Thomas isn't just your son." She felt a chill run down her spine when he said her name. Despite the fact that he had never been permitted to use her first name before, there was something else in his tone that suggested a connection that she had not considered. "What's your point?" "I'll tell you a story about a 17-year-old slave who was sold from your plantation. Get on the horse." A young man who spent years locating every person who had ever been sold from that location. A young boy who found out that one of them had a very intriguing secret. Evangeline thought quickly. What secret about her son could a former slave possibly know? However, as she gazed into Meridian's eyes, she came to the realization that everything she had ever known about her past was about to be rewritten. Before accepting Meridian's hand, Evangeline only paused. Her fear of the man she had once beaten was outweighed by her need to learn the truth about her son. Meridian began to speak so quietly as they rode out of Copper Ridge that she had to lean forward to hear him over the horse's hooves. "I ended up on a ranch in Texas after you sold me. I was there for 5 years before I was granted my freedom papers. However, I never forgot that plantation or the people who were dispersed like leaves in the wind when your husband's debts started piling up. Sagebrush and the skeletal remains of dead trees, the endless desert landscape in front of them." Evangeline was struck by how different Meridian was from the terrified boy she remembered because she had never been this close to him as an adult. He had survived everything the world could throw at him, which gave him a quiet strength and confidence. He went on to say, "I started tracking down everyone who had been sold. Most were dead. Some had established new lives. But there was one person I couldn't find, and that person went missing around the time your son was born." Evangeline's heart started to race. "Who?" "Isaiah was a slave. Young man, probably around 19 years old. Worked in the stables of your husband. He was believed to have been caught with one of the white women in town and to have been quickly sold off to avoid being lynched." Evangeline's veins' blood turned to ice. She thought back to Isaiah, who was tall, kind, and had the most stunning eyes she had ever seen. During the most difficult time of her marriage, when her husband's drinking and gambling had made her life a living hell, he had been kind to her. She whispered, "But that's impossible. Thomas was born before Isaiah was sold." "Was he?" Her stomach tightened at the weight of Meridian's voice. "Or was Thomas sold because he was about to give birth?" She was hit hard by the truth. The time frame, the sudden violent and suspicious behavior on her husband's part, and the reason he demanded the baby be given away right away, claiming to be poor when they still had enough money to keep him. Her husband was aware of it. He had sold Isaiah after discovering her affair and protecting the family's reputation. Then, he had coerced her into giving the child away when Thomas was born with features that might lead to questions as he got older. She breathed, "No. That simply cannot be." "I found Isaiah 3 years ago," Meridian said gently. "Working as a blacksmith, living in California. He was unaware of your or the child's fate. I had no idea he had a son." The world of Evangeline turned on its axis. Thomas was not only her son, but also the son of Isaiah. Without knowing his true heritage, the child of her forbidden affair was about to join an all-black regiment in battle. "Does Isaiah?" She began to inquire. "Alive and well. I continue to inquire about you each time I visit him." She was afraid to cross the bridge of words that passed between them. Isaiah had survived. He was alive and thinking about her after years of believing he had been killed by a vengeful mob. "Why are you stating this to me?" she asked in a barely audible whisper. Meridian was quiet for a long moment. His words conveyed a pain that pierced her heart when he finally spoke. "Because Isaiah once spared my life. Isaiah stepped in and took half of the punishment when your husband was beating me for that missing tool, which you blamed me for. He was not required. Do that. Could have, like everyone else, looked the other way. Evangeline recalled that day as she closed her eyes. She needed someone to blame because she was so enraged and frustrated with her own powerlessness. Meridian had been harmless, but it had been convenient. Meridian went on to say, "He protected me when no one else would. Now his son is riding into danger, and the only person who can save him is his mother. Evangeline, that's why I bought you. Not for retaliation." "Why then?" "To give you the chance to do something right for once in your life." Because they were true, the words hurt. Evangeline, on the other hand, realized that Meridian's plan was far more complicated than a straightforward rescue mission when they reached the top of a hill and saw the vast valley below. Because if Thomas discovered the truth about his parents, it would not only endanger his life but also all of his preconceived notions about himself. They rode hard into the afternoon, with the sun beating down on them like a cruel eye. Evangeline's mind was filled with new information, but one question stood out more than any other. "Why do you need me if you know where Thomas is and where Isaiah is?" Meridian clenched his jaw. "Because your son despises the entire South. Everything about the owners of plantations. Everything about people who are similar to you." She was struck hard by the words. "What's your point?" He was informed by the orphanage's sisters that his shameful parents were wealthy Southerners. He was raised to believe that wealthy white people threw him away like trash. He joined the Buffalo Soldiers for this reason, to oppose everything he believes his parents stood for. Evangeline was ill. Her act of giving up Thomas to shield him from her husband's fury had been twisted into a narrative that made her son resent the very people from whom he had come. Meridian went on to say, "He won't listen to me. A black bounty hunter bringing tales of his real parents? He'll think I'm lying and think I'm trying to get him to leave. Only you, when he discovers who I really am, he'll hate me even more. Maybe. Or perhaps he will reconsider her true character after witnessing how she puts her life at risk to save him." When they reached the top of yet another hill, they could see smoke rising in the distance, not the fine specks of smoke from a campfire, but the thick, black columns of an uncontrollable fire. Meridian gave his horse a faster spur. The terrifying source of the smoke became abundantly clear as they got closer. On the road, a stagecoach's overturned wooden frame was smoking and crackling with flames. It was littered with broken bodies all over. Meridian grimly stated, "Apache raid," before descending to examine the situation. "Recent. Perhaps an hour ago." As she observed the devastation, Evangeline remained on the horse with a pale face. However, Meridian was looking into brand-new tracks that were heading north toward a rocky outcropping. He stated, "Someone survived. They are stowing away up there." The rocks were approached cautiously. With his hands outstretched and visible in both English and Spanish, Meridian called out. A sluggish voice responded after a moment. "Please, assist." A young soldier in a blue uniform, bleeding from a head wound, was discovered wedged between two boulders. But Evangeline's heart stopped when he looked up at them. She has the same stubborn jaw she kissed goodnight 17 years ago, blonde hair and green eyes. Thomas was the one. He said softly, "Thank God, ma'am." The Apaches, who snatched up everyone else. "I was afraid I would die here." Evangeline was unable to breathe or speak. Her wounded but still alive son was looking up at her with trust and gratitude. He didn't know who she was. Meridian inspected his wounds as he knelt beside him. "Soldier, what's your name?" "Ninth Cavalry Private Thomas Morrison. We were accompanied to the stage. At dawn, Apaches struck us." He spoke slowly and weakly. "Are you from Santa Fe?" I asked. Meridian replied, "Something along those lines." "Could you ride?" "I believe so." "However, ma'am," Thomas directly addressed Evangeline, "you appear familiar. Do you know me from someplace?" Like a loaded gun, the query hung in the air. Evangeline found that she was looking into the eyes of the child she had given birth to, the child she had only held for 3 months before she had to let go. His expression of trust was the same as when he was a baby when he was looking at her. She whispered, I don't think so," she managed. However, Meridian was observing them both with an expression that suggested that this meeting was not a fluke. He said quietly, "Actually, Thomas, There's something you need to know about this woman. Something that will shake up everything you think you know about life." Due to his injuries, Thomas struggled to sit up. "What are you referring to?" Evangeline then came to the conclusion that Meridian had not brought her here with the sole intention of rescuing Thomas from the Apache wars. He had planned everything about this meeting, from the auction to the ride to finding Thomas injured and in danger. Everything had been planned to force this moment, when a mother would have to choose between protecting the lie that had kept her son safe for 17 years and revealing the truth that could save his life. The story continues with the same structure and meaning, paraphrasing each sentence after it while keeping the original narrative flow, character growth, and emotional impact until the end.